Welcome to Business Talk here on businesstech.co.za, South Africa's #1 business news site. I'm your host, Michael Avery, and tonight we're taking the pulse of the critical topic of healthcare in South Africa. As we all know, healthcare remains a significant concern for many South Africans, especially in these challenging economic times. We've got the great pleasure of speaking with Aron, who's the principal officer at Medshield Medical Scheme. Medshield recently held its 55th annual general meeting, and despite a tough economic year, the scheme has maintained an impressive performance, boasting a healthy solvency ratio, a strong credit rating, and certainly a testament to its resilience and strategic management. So we're going to be exploring some of the highlights and talking about the broader context of some of the health issues that impact South Africa as we're all debating National Health Insurance, or NHI. Kevin, always great to catch up with you. How has Medshield managed to maintain such a healthy solvency ratio and strong credit rating despite the challenging economic climate for medical schemes?
Yeah, hi, Mike, and thank you for having me again on your program. It's always a pleasure. Look, I think that what we have is a combination of factors. I think, first of all, we've always taken a very prudent approach to contribution increases. So we don't pursue a strategy of membership at all costs. We very prudent on our contribution increases, and we can actually see with some of our competitors who over the last 2 years chased membership by going with very, very low contribution increases. And then it catches up with you, and it catches up with you because you're underpriced. So you tend to then attract, you attract actually then members who you may not actually want on particular options because they have a high claiming pattern. So what you might find is that pensioners, as an example, are attracted into a scheme because it's deliberately underpriced. They come onto the low income options, but their claiming behavior as a pensioner, and it's really not their fault, is at a level that it's just not linked to the design of the benefit. So we've always been quite prudent in terms of making sure that we don't do something like that, that we not overly, almost irresponsible. And, slowly over a period of time, what we've also found is that we've had very, very good investment returns. So I'm not an investor. I don't play the stock market very much, but we do have very good consultants who look after the members' reserves. And what we found is that, our net investment income has always been significantly higher over the last 3 years to what we've budgeted for. So you're actually building up nice reserves. The last point I'd almost make is that one has to be a little bit careful about this word solvency because it can change so quickly. The Council for Medical Schemes doesn't require a medical scheme to disclose risk-based solvency. So the solvency percentage is a percentage, of reserves over gross contribution income. So, in a sense, it's a ratio that can change dramatically based on whether you're actually losing members and your contribution income goes down. And we've seen that again. I tend to study a lot of our competitors a lot, and you can see, some schemes, one in particular, dropped their solvency 10% in a year. So solvency is a measure, but it's not the only measure that we look at in terms of whether a scheme is healthy or not.
Yeah, and as we know, medical schemes rely on attracting younger, healthier members who cross-subsidize to a certain extent some of the older members on the scheme. And so it's so important as well to ensure that you're remaining attractive across the demographics and age groups. So maybe you can just share some more insights into the demographics of the scheme and what are some of the trends that you're picking up there. And I just want to pick up on that point you raised about pensioners maybe taking the wrong kind of cover. Also, how complicit some of the brokers are in advising on or selling, the wrong solution.
Thanks, Mike. You've raised a hornet's nest, because this is some work that I've been doing for the last 3 weeks, almost dedicated, looking into the detail of the scheme. And you're absolutely right. Look, the principles of a medical scheme are based around cross-subsidization. But I think that implies, and the intention it was always intended, that that the membership, or the underlying membership, would grow at all levels. So if you don't get any growth, your scheme will age a year. But I think the intention was that maybe with a better economy, and with maybe some different regulatory controls that we have in place, that there would be actually an influx of young and healthy people coming into medical aids, and those young and healthy people would, by nature, cross-subsidize the elderly. Now, the sort of research that I've been doing on Medshield has shown, and it's no different if you look at some of our competitors like Discovery. If you look at the integrated report, they talk about it as well, is that age is probably the primary sort of indicator that you can look at in terms of what claiming patterns are going to be. So when you start sort of at a 0 to 1 year old, you're going to have very high claims, because someone who's just had a baby will take their baby to the pediatrician, will take them to the gynecologist quite often in the first year. So you actually have funny enough, a very high claims ratio in the sort of 0 to 1. But after 1, what you find is that the claims ratio drops dramatically, to the point that, on average across our scheme, we're seeing that if you attract a 40-year-old into the scheme, the claims ratio is really only around about 62%. But if it increases, and just to give an indication, the stats we're looking at in Medshield is that on average, when you get to about 60 to 65, your claims ratio goes to about 108%, which effectively means that you're costing the scheme more in terms of claims than what you're contributing. Now, this will only work if there's cross-subsidization of younger people coming in. And that is not happening. That's not happening in the industry. A big cause of it is the health insurance products that are allowed to operate without the sort of restrictions that medical schemes have, such as prescribed minimum benefits, solvency ratios, etc. And that is a major problem. That's the biggest problem that medical schemes have to date. It's not that there isn't growth, but the growth is not young growth. We don't find that we're attracting sufficiently young and healthy. The second problem, which is a major, major problem, what I'm finding is that the intermediaries or the brokers are not matching the needs of the members based on their age with the design of the product. So, for example, if you're going to put a 65 or a 70-year-old person onto a very low-cost benefit option, where most of the benefits are PMB or PMB only, you're actually doing a disservice to both parties. The older person is typically, if they get cancer, not going to get rich cancer benefits. They're going to get PMB level of care only, which actually doesn't help them in many respects. But the big problem is affordability. And what often happens with the brokers is that they try to put members onto a more comprehensive plan because of their age, but they just can't afford it. And then what they do is they put them onto a much cheaper option, and that has a terrible, terrible impact on the option, because if you're not getting that cross mix or that cross subsidization, the elderly people are actually going to destroy the option. And it's not their fault. It's just that older people will end up in hospital more. They tend to get chronic disease more. they just cost the scheme much more. So that is the biggest challenge. And if you look at the regulations, I think as they were originally intended, the one thing that was missing is something called the Risk Equalization Fund. And that was really intended to look at this issue and say schemes that had a much poorer profile would be subsidized by schemes that had a better profile to try equalize it out. We also haven't had the Council for Medical Schemes reviewing the prescribed minimum benefits for probably the last 10 years. I think they were meant to review them every 2 years. So there's a lot of confusion around it. I consistently get members who send me doctors' motivations where the doctors are insistent that the procedure is a PMB. And when you go and look at the detail in the Council for Medical Schemes guidelines, it's clearly not a PMB. So, to some degree, the specialists are also driving it because they know that the members can't afford spinal surgery if it's PMB and PMB only. So they motivate for it to be PMB. So it's a real challenge, but it's what we have. And what we've done at Medshield is we've adopted an approach where we are not chasing growth at all costs. That will lead to the destruction of the scheme. We take a balanced view. We set lowish targets for growth. Obviously, we do want to grow, but we are more interested in the quality. And that's not to say that we don't want to have elderly people onto our options, but ideally what we'd like to put them onto is the more comprehensive options, which have actually been designed for their age group.
Yeah. So, on that note, how are you then catering to the healthcare needs of middle to upper income earners in their 40s and beyond? I would classify myself absolutely in that bracket now, just on the wrong side of 40. And it accords with what you were saying. I hardly ever, touch the medical aid. Yes, we did when we had children for a couple of years, but certainly apart from the flu season, it's not something that you're dipping into all of the time. But we're going to remain members of the scheme because we know, we're going to be older soon, probably sooner than we realize, and we're going to need that cover. So how are you thinking about making it attractive for kind of my demographic?
So I think obviously for someone like in your demographic, we firstly need to design benefits that cater for what you do actually need. So, typically you can afford to go to the GP and pay out of pocket. We wouldn't have that on your option. We would have typically unlimited GP consultations. We would have certainly a number of specialist out-of-hospital consultations, but we would obviously have a much richer, for example, oncology or cancer benefit available. So, we use a designated service provider that has different protocols for the lower income options. It's more a PMB only type of protocol. For the middle options, it's a much more comprehensive protocol. So you would be getting access to a wider range of medicine that is available than, say, to the low income options, where typically young people who should go onto those options wouldn't be worrying about cancer too much at that point in time. So we would obviously then try to attract you onto the higher options by having a much richer benefit for oncology, including biologicals. What we would also do is we would have a less restricted hospital network. So, again, young people typically don't worry too much about a hospital network and if it's restricted, because they don't think about so much the fact that they're going to go into hospital. Whereas people who are a little bit more starting to age, almost like my age, we start to think now about, the fact that we're getting chronic diseases and we may end up in hospital, and then your choice of hospital and the range becomes a little bit more important. So what you typically find on the more comprehensive options, you either don't even have a hospital network. You can go to any hospital network. Like on our top two options, you can go to any hospital you want. Then the hospital network is more comprehensive in terms of range. So we typically try and make sure that we can cover you within a range of, say, 20 kilometers of where you live. And then as you move downwards, the hospital network becomes more restricted. Typically, again, to try to prevent the buy-down impact, and also because younger people, as I say, are less worried about that. A key thing, just maybe to say again, is affordability. And one of the things that we're looking at Medshield, especially in the design of our hospital networks, is how we can leverage and negotiate better hospital rates. Hospital costs make up, on average, about 50% of what a medical aid spends. So if we can, and specialists are around about 28 to 30% now. So it's not really the dentist and the doctor, the GP, that we worry about. It's more the hospital and the specialist, because that's where the big costs are. So it's all part of a strategy, but part of our strategy now is looking at, going out on tender, looking at how we can partner maybe with a hospital group. We can drive more volume into their hospital, which benefits them. In return, we want better rates, we want better quality, and we want more innovation. We're looking also for hospital groups to come forward with innovative ideas, such as risk sharing. Typically a hospital makes its money by filling its bed, but it can also make money if it goes on a risk-sharing agreement by keeping people out of hospital, and you can make money on that. So those are the type of things we're looking at within Medshield at the moment.
Very innovative, but this all, again, takes place within the broader context of the NHI debate in South Africa. And, you mentioned some of the regulatory constraints. They're almost like albatrosses around the medical scheme's necks. The least cost benefit options, the fact that PMBs haven't been reviewed. And as an outsider, one almost looks at this and thinks, the regulations are stymieing medical schemes to the point of failure, which would suit those who are trying to push for a central fund through the NHI, which is now an act. So there's a lot of skepticism in the market. We're chatting now in a week where the certificate of need was struck down. It now needs to go to the Constitutional Court for certification. I was chatting to healthcare lawyer Neil Kirby about this, and it does seem to make it a lot more difficult now for government to direct specialists to go and practice in certain areas. Taken all together, and with the tone that's been struck in the government of national unity, how likely is it that we're to see an NHI in its current guise actually rolled out? And if you're explaining this to a member of a scheme now who's obviously worried and saying, well, should I have a medical aid? Shouldn't I? What's going to happen? How do you see this playing out?
World War III. I think this is going to be a massive fight. If you just look at the certificate of need, in many respects, I don't even know what to use as the word, whether it was naughty or just crazy. But if you're trying to actually now force a specialist who, for example, has had a very successful practice, say in the Western Cape, for the last 10 or 15 years, and you deny him his certificate of need, and you give him a certificate of need that he can only practice, say, in Umtata, I mean, the chances are that he's going to emigrate, and he's going to go do his work elsewhere. So, the certificate of need, I'm very glad that it was struck down, because I think that it's a weapon. And I read an article that sort of mentioned it would be turning doctors into slaves, where basically at the whim of the Department of Health, they would be told where they can practice. Hospitals and facilities would be told whether they can increase beds or not. And obviously, I understand that we have a lot more specialists, in particular in the urban areas, and a lot less in the rural areas. But I don't think that using the certificate of need as a weapon is the way to go. I think there's other strategies that the department needs to look at to encourage and entice and incentivize doctors to want to go out and work in those areas. You also mentioned the regulatory environment that the medical schemes are operating into. And, often I wonder whether some of the things that are happening are linked to the push to almost move into an NHI. And I'll just give you one example, with PMBs and level of care. The intention was always that, if a surgery or a particular procedure or a particular drug is prevalent within the state hospital, then it would be regarded as PMB level of care, and you would have to pay for it as a PMB. What we're finding at the moment is that we contact some hospitals, or we do research on a new drug that's come out, for example, a cancer drug that's very, 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 very expensive. And we find that there's maybe one hospital in the entire South Africa that's used this drug, and they've only used it on one patient. And the likelihood is that the drug has actually been sponsored by a pharmaceutical company, but the Council for Medical Schemes now deems it to be PMB level of care. And medical schemes are then obliged to fund that drug in full with no co-payment. And these are things that can sink medical schemes very, very quickly. So, that's why I sort of refer to it as World War III, because, medical schemes are actually fighting for their survival. But now doctors and specialists and other healthcare providers are also going to be fighting for their survival as government now tries to impose the NHI. My personal feeling, and it's based on, what I hear and what I've read and what you hear about how long it took for other very, very sophisticated countries, or first world countries, to implement an NHI. I think we are many, many years away. I'm actually not convinced that South Africa can implement an NHI, and I don't think they can afford it. And what was very interesting is that Nicholas Crisp, in the same article I read, basically almost said, let's not worry about the budget. We'll deal with it on an incremental basis as we slowly roll out the NHI. But you can't do that. You need to have an estimate of what it's going to cost. And there's no doubt in my mind that with the shrinking tax base that we have, South Africa just can't afford it in the context of which government wants it. There are certainly elements of an NHI that are applaudable and could be rolled out, maybe more at the primary care level. But I think to roll out a full NHI is crazy. And that's the message that I also want to give the members. Medical aids are not necessarily there to help you with your day-to-day GP visits. They're really designed, and that's where they differentiate from insurance products in terms of when you have a catastrophe, when you have a motor vehicle accident and you're lying in hospital and the bill is going to come to 5 million rand. Or, you go in for a straightforward procedure. We had one of these. It was our highest cost claim last year. Patient went in for some spinal surgery. It really wasn't complicated, but she ended up with complications, developed septicemia, which was very resistant to any of the antibiotics. And the bill came to 9.2 million rand. And the medical scheme paid for that in full. Now, if you're not on a medical aid, very few people have that sort of money to pay for in full. And most insurance products cap at a certain rate. And then the patient basically has to find the money, or they're going to be transferred to a state hospital.
Well, Kevin, it's been a fascinating half hour chatting to you about the scheme and the way you've managed to navigate what is clearly a very tricky environment for schemes, innovating, thinking out the box, and using the size and obviously very prudential management, not growing at all costs to ensure that you will be fighting for scheme members in this ongoing World War III that you described that schemes are operating under. Thanks so much for joining us here on Business Talk on businesstech.co.za.